The morning sun cast long shadows across the flight deck of the USS Valiant as Captain Sarah Phoenix Chen completed her pre-flight inspection. Her F-35C Lightning II gleamed under the early light, every surface meticulously checked and double-checked. At 28, Sarah was one of the youngest squadron leaders in the Navy, but her record spoke louder than her age ever could. The intelligence briefing had been clear. Enemy forces were massing near the disputed Coral Chain Islands, approximately 200 miles southeast of their current position. Satellite imagery showed at least 12 fighter aircraft preparing for what appeared to be a coordinated strike against Allied shipping lanes. Sarah's mission was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Conduct a reconnaissance patrol and report back on enemy movements. What the intelligence reports hadn't mentioned, and what Sarah's enemies were counting on, was their assumption that any lone American pilot venturing into their airspace would be easy prey. They had studied American tactics, analyzed pilot profiles, and concluded that their numerical superiority would make quick work of any intruder. They were about to learn how wrong assumptions could be. Sarah climbed into her cockpit, running through the familiar ritual of strapping in and connecting her life support systems. The canopy lowered with a soft hiss, sealing her into the technological marvel that had become her second home. Around her, the advanced displays came to life, painting a picture of the world beyond in vivid detail. Tower. Phoenix. 1 requesting clearance for takeoff. She spoke into her radio, her voice calm and professional. Phoenix 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is 270 at 15 knots. Weather clear, visibility unlimited. Good hunting out there. The catapult launch felt like being shot from a cannon. In less than 3 seconds, Sarah went from 0 to 150 miles per hour, the massive acceleration pressing her deep into her ejection seat. Then she was airborne, climbing rapidly into the crystal-clear morning sky. Below her, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface broken only by the white wake of the carrier battle group. Sarah banked to the southeast, her aircraft's twin engines pushing her toward the unknown. The flight to the patrol area would take 45 minutes, giving her time to review the mission parameters and mentally prepare for whatever lay ahead. The F-35's stealth capabilities meant she could get much closer to enemy positions than previous generation aircraft. Her radar signature was roughly equivalent to a bird, making detection extremely difficult until she was almost on top of her targets. But stealth had its limitations. Once she engaged weapon systems or maneuvered aggressively, her electronic signature would bloom like a lighthouse beacon. As she flew southeast, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in San Diego, she had always been fascinated by aircraft. Her father, a retired Air Force mechanic, had taken her to air shows throughout her childhood, explaining how different aircraft worked and what made them special. By age 10, she knew she wanted to fly. The road hadn't been easy. Flight school had pushed her to her limits, both physically and mentally. The competition was fierce, with dozens of qualified candidates vying for each available pilot slot. Sarah had distinguished herself not just through raw talent, but through an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure and make split-second tactical decisions. Her call sign, Phoenix, had come during advanced fighter training. During a particularly challenging exercise, her instructor had simulated multiple system failures, forcing Sarah to make an emergency landing with most of her aircraft systems offline. Not only had she landed safely, but she had done so while maintaining perfect radio discipline and even talking another struggling pilot through his own emergency. The instructor later said she had risen from the ashes of what should have been a failed exercise. Now, 3 years later, Sarah commanded VFA 143, one of the Navy's most elite fighter squadrons. Her pilots respected her not just for her skills, but for her unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home safely. She had never lost a pilot under her command, a record she intended to maintain. The radio crackled to life, breaking her reverie. Phoenix 1, this is Overwatch. We're showing you approaching the patrol area. Be advised, we're detecting increased radio chatter from the target zone. Multiple contacts moving at high altitude. Roger, Overwatch. Phoenix 1 switching to patrol frequency. Beginning surveillance pass. Sarah's radar display showed multiple contacts approximately 50 miles ahead, flying in what appeared to be a defensive formation. She counted at least 8 aircraft, possibly more. Their flight patterns suggested they were conducting combat air patrol over the disputed islands, protecting something valuable on the ground. The enemy force consisted primarily of advanced fighter aircraft, a mix of Russian-built Sukhoi Su-35 and Chinese J-20 stealth fighters. On paper, they represented some of the most capable air-to-air combat aircraft in the world. Their pilots were likely experienced and well-trained, confident in their superior numbers and the protection of their home territory. What they didn't know was that they were being watched by someone who had spent thousands of hours studying their tactics, their aircraft capabilities, and their standard operating procedures. Sarah had made it her business to understand her potential enemies better than they understood themselves. As she approached the edge of the contested zone, Sarah made a decision that would have surprised her enemies if they had known about it. Instead of maintaining a safe distance and simply observing, she began a careful infiltration of their airspace. Using terrain masking and her aircraft's stealth capabilities, she gradually worked her way closer to the enemy formation. The risk was enormous. If detected, she would face overwhelming odds with no immediate backup. The nearest Allied aircraft were over an hour away, far too distant to provide assistance if things went wrong. But Sarah had learned something important during her years of combat training. Sometimes the most dangerous course of action was also the most effective. Her passive sensors picked up radio transmissions from the enemy aircraft. Most were routine position reports and status updates. But one conversation caught her attention. The enemy flight leader was directing 2 aircraft to investigate what he called possible radar anomalies to the northwest, directly towards Sarah's approach vector. Time was running out. In minutes, the investigating aircraft would be close enough to detect her despite her stealth capabilities. Sarah had to make a choice: retreat to safety and report what she had observed, or press forward and attempt to gather more detailed intelligence. The decision came down to mission priorities. The intelligence briefing had emphasized the critical importance of determining enemy capabilities and intentions. Half measures wouldn't provide the information her commanders needed to plan their response. If she was going to gather useful intelligence, she needed to get close enough to identify specific aircraft types, weapons loadouts, and tactical formations. Sarah made her choice. Instead of turning back, she activated her aircraft's most advanced surveillance systems and began a detailed reconnaissance of the enemy force. Her passive sensors recorded radio frequencies, radar signatures, and electronic emissions from each aircraft in the formation. The data would be invaluable for future operations, assuming she could get it back to the carrier. The 2 investigating aircraft were getting closer. Sarah's threat warning system remained quiet, indicating they hadn't yet detected her presence, but that could change in seconds. She watched their approach on her display, calculating intercept times and plotting potential escape routes. Then something unexpected happened. The lead investigating aircraft suddenly broke formation and began descending rapidly toward the ocean surface. His wingman followed, both pilots apparently responding to new orders from their flight leader. Sarah's radio intercept equipment picked up fragments of the conversation. Something about priority target and immediate investigation. A new contact appeared on Sarah's display, approaching from the east at high speed. The radar signature was consistent with a large transport aircraft, possibly carrying high-value cargo or personnel. The entire enemy formation was repositioning to provide escort for this new arrival, creating an opportunity Sarah hadn't anticipated. In the confusion of the repositioning, Sarah found herself in an ideal surveillance position. The enemy aircraft were focused on their new mission, paying less attention to potential threats from other directions. She was able to move even closer, gathering detailed intelligence on their communications procedures, weapons systems, and coordination protocols. But her luck was about to run out. As the enemy formation completed its repositioning, one of the Su-35 pilots happened to glance in her direction during a routine clearing turn. For a split second, sunlight reflected off Sarah's canopy, creating a brief but visible glint against the sky. The enemy pilot's reaction was immediate. His aircraft snapped into a hard turn toward Sarah's position, and his radio transmission was urgent and alarmed. Within seconds, the entire enemy formation was aware of her presence and moving to intercept. Sarah found herself exactly where her enemies had expected her to be. Alone, outnumbered, and deep in hostile territory. What they didn't expect was what happened next. Instead of turning tail and running, Sarah did something that went against every conventional wisdom about air-to-air combat. She turned directly toward the incoming threat and began accelerating to attack speed. Her aircraft's weapon systems came online, and her stealth advantage evaporated as active sensors painted the sky around her. The enemy pilots couldn't believe what they were seeing. A single American fighter was charging straight at 8 of their best aircraft, showing no sign of fear or hesitation. Their initial assumption was that she must be the lead element of a larger force. With additional American aircraft hidden nearby ready to spring a trap, they were wrong. Sarah Chen was completely alone, armed with nothing but her skills, her aircraft, and an unshakable belief that the best defense was often an overwhelming offense. The enemy had made the mistake of underestimating her based on numbers alone. They were about to learn that in aerial combat, pilot skill and tactical innovation could overcome almost any disadvantage. The first enemy aircraft to reach firing position was a Su-35, flown by a veteran pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight time. He had every advantage: altitude, speed, and the support of 7 additional aircraft. His missile lock was solid, his aircraft positioned perfectly for a textbook intercept. He never saw the attack that destroyed him. Sarah had used her aircraft's superior sensors and electronic warfare capabilities to mask her true intentions until the last possible moment. While the Su-35 pilot focused on achieving a conventional missile lock, Sarah had positioned herself for a close-range engagement that would neutralize his numerical advantage. The destruction of the first enemy aircraft sent shockwaves through the remaining formation. Their confidence evaporated as they realized they weren't dealing with a routine intercept, but with a pilot whose capabilities far exceeded their expectations. The easy victory they had anticipated was turning into something much more dangerous. Sarah's radio crackled with urgent transmissions as the enemy flight leader tried to coordinate a response to her unexpected attack, but she was already moving to her next target, using the confusion and surprise to maintain her tactical advantage. The battle that would make Sarah Chen a legend was just beginning. 7 enemy aircraft remained, all flown by experienced pilots in capable aircraft. The odds were still heavily against her, but Sarah had already proven that odds meant nothing when matched against superior skill and tactical innovation. As she maneuvered for her second attack, Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. Her enemies had expected to find an easy target flying alone in hostile territory. Instead, they had stumbled into an encounter with one of the most dangerous fighter pilots ever to take to the skies. The morning sun continued its climb toward noon, casting sharp shadows across the contested waters below. In the sky above, a battle was unfolding that would change everything the enemy thought they knew about American fighter capabilities. They had made the fatal mistake of judging their opponent by appearance rather than ability. That mistake was going to cost them dearly. The second Su-35 pilot, call sign Viper 7, had been flying combat missions for 12 years. He had trained with the best instructors, flown against top-tier opponents in exercises, and never met an enemy he couldn't defeat. As he watched his wingman's aircraft disintegrate in a ball of fire and metal, he felt something he had never experienced in combat before. Genuine fear. The American pilot wasn't following any recognizable tactical doctrine. Instead of using her stealth to stay hidden and pick off targets from long range, she had deliberately revealed herself, and was now fighting like a cornered wildcat. Unpredictable, aggressive, and absolutely lethal. All units, this is Viper Leader. The enemy flight commander transmitted, his voice tight with stress. Target is a single F-35. Repeat, single aircraft. Implement Falcon formation immediately. Do not underestimate this pilot. Sarah heard every word through her electronic surveillance equipment. The enemy was adapting quickly, abandoning their loose patrol formation in favor of a tight defensive setup designed to eliminate her numerical disadvantage. In Falcon formation, the remaining 7 aircraft would position themselves to provide overlapping fields of fire, making it nearly impossible for a single attacker to engage one without exposing herself to multiple others. It was a textbook response to her unconventional tactics, and it would have been effective against most pilots. But Sarah had spent years studying enemy tactics and had developed countermeasures for exactly this situation. The key was to prevent them from achieving the formation at all. As the enemy aircraft began maneuvering into position, Sarah identified the critical node in their formation. A J-20 stealth fighter that would serve as the electronic warfare center for the group. If she could eliminate that aircraft, the remaining pilots would lose their coordination advantage and be forced to fight as individuals rather than as a cohesive unit. The J-20 was perhaps the most dangerous aircraft in the enemy formation. Its stealth capabilities were nearly as advanced as her own F-35, and its pilot was likely among their most skilled. Attacking it would mean penetrating the defensive screen of the other aircraft and engaging in close-quarters combat with minimal room for error. Sarah banked hard to the left, using a low-altitude cloud layer to mask her approach. The enemy pilots lost visual contact for precious seconds, during which Sarah completely changed her attack vector. When she emerged from the clouds, she was approaching from an angle none of them had anticipated. The J-20 pilot, call sign Dragon Leader, realized the danger too late. Sarah's first missile struck his aircraft's port engine, sending it into an uncontrollable spin toward the ocean below. The pilot ejected safely, but his aircraft, and its critical electronic warfare capabilities, was gone. Dragon Leader is down. Dragon Leader is down! The radio chatter exploded with confused and increasingly panicked transmissions as the enemy pilots struggled to comprehend how a single opponent was systematically destroying their formation. Sarah didn't give them time to recover. Before the remaining pilots could re-establish their defensive positions, she was already positioning herself for the next attack. Her target was a Su-35 that had become isolated during the previous engagement, its pilot so focused on tracking Sarah's last known position that he had lost situational awareness of his wingman's location. The attack came from directly above, a classic bounce maneuver that fighter pilots had been using since World War I. Sarah's second missile found its mark with devastating precision, and another enemy aircraft began its final descent toward the churning waters below. 5 aircraft remained, but their formation discipline was beginning to crack. The careful coordination they had planned was falling apart under the stress of losing 3 aircraft in less than 4 minutes. Individual pilots were making decisions based on fear rather than training, breaking formation to pursue personal vendettas against the pilot who was systematically destroying their unit. "This is impossible," transmitted Viper 7, the pilot who had witnessed the destruction of the first aircraft. "How is one pilot doing this to us?" His flight leader's response was curt and professional, but Sarah could hear the strain underneath. "Maintain formation discipline. Do not engage individually. Repeat. Do not engage individually." But it was too late. The psychological advantage had shifted completely. What had begun as a confident intercept of a lone intruder had become a nightmare scenario where experienced pilots were being outfought by an opponent they couldn't understand or predict. Sarah capitalized on their confusion by employing a tactic that would have been suicide against a disciplined formation but was devastatingly effective against demoralized opponents. She deliberately exposed herself to attack from 2 aircraft simultaneously, drawing them both into firing positions where they would interfere with each other's targeting solutions. The first pilot to achieve missile lock hesitated for a critical second, unwilling to fire with his wingman directly in the potential blast radius. That moment of hesitation was all Sarah needed to reverse the engagement, putting both enemy aircraft in her sights instead. Her third and fourth missiles launched within seconds of each other, tracking toward targets that had suddenly found themselves transformed from hunters to prey. Both missiles found their marks, adding 2 more victories to what was rapidly becoming the most one-sided aerial engagement in modern combat history. 3 enemy aircraft remained, and their pilots were beginning to panic. The confident professionals who had taken off that morning expecting an easy victory were now facing the very real possibility of complete annihilation at the hands of a single opponent. "Request immediate reinforcements," Viper 7 transmitted, his voice cracking with stress. "We need backup now." The response from their ground controller was not what they wanted to hear. Negative on reinforcements. All available aircraft committed to other missions. You are ordered to eliminate the threat and return to base. Sarah smiled grimly as she intercepted the transmission. The enemy command structure was beginning to understand that they were dealing with something unprecedented, but their response was too little and too late. The pilots she was fighting were among their best, and if they couldn't handle a single F-35, additional aircraft would only provide more targets. The remaining 3 pilots, 2 Su-35 seconds and 1 J-20, attempted to regroup for a final coordinated attack. Their plan was simple. Attack from 3 different vectors simultaneously, forcing Sarah to choose which threat to engage while leaving herself vulnerable to the others. It was a sound tactical decision, but it assumed their opponent would react conventionally. Sarah Chen had stopped following conventional wisdom the moment she decided to engage 8 aircraft single-handedly. Instead of choosing one target and hoping to defeat it before the others could engage, Sarah did something that violated every principle of aerial combat. She attacked all 3 simultaneously. Using her aircraft's sophisticated electronic warfare systems, she created multiple false radar signatures, making it appear as though there were several F-35 seconds approaching from different directions. The enemy pilots, already rattled by their losses, reacted by spreading their formation even wider to meet the perceived multiple threats. This gave Sarah the opening she needed to engage each aircraft individually, while they were too far apart to support each other. Her 5th missile destroyed the lead Su-35 before its pilot realized he was facing the real threat rather than an electronic phantom. The remaining 2 pilots finally understood what they were up against. They weren't fighting a conventional air-to-air engagement. They were facing a pilot whose skills were so far beyond their experience that normal tactical principles no longer applied. Viper 7, the longest surviving member of the original formation, made a desperate radio call. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Viper 7. I'm being engaged by something impossible. Request immediate emergency extraction." His wingman, flying the last operational J-20, had already made the decision to disengage. Banking away from the combat area at full afterburner, the J-20 pilot transmitted a brief message. "I'm out of here. This isn't worth dying for." Sarah had a clear shot at the fleeing aircraft, but she made a calculated decision to let it escape. One surviving pilot would be able to report back on what had happened, ensuring that the enemy understood they were no longer facing an opponent they could defeat through conventional means. That left Viper 7 alone in the sky with the pilot who had just destroyed 7 of his comrades in less than 15 minutes. The Su-35 pilot was experienced enough to know that running would only delay the inevitable. Sarah's F-35 had demonstrated superior performance in every category that mattered: speed, maneuverability, electronics, and most importantly, pilot skill. If he was going to die, he preferred to do it fighting rather than fleeing. "Unknown F-35 pilot," he transmitted on an open frequency. "You have fought with honor. I salute your skills." Sarah's response surprised him. Instead of the cocky bravado he expected from someone who had just achieved the impossible, her voice was calm and respectful. "You fought well, Viper 7. Your formation showed courage under difficult circumstances." The final engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Viper 7 attempted every evasive maneuver in his considerable repertoire, pushing his aircraft to its absolute limits in a desperate attempt to avoid the inevitable. But Sarah had already demonstrated that conventional tactics were useless against her unconventional approach. Her final missile of the engagement struck Viper 7's aircraft amidships, breaking it apart in a spectacular explosion that could be seen for miles. The pilot ejected successfully, his parachute deploying as he began his descent toward the rescue boats that were already racing toward the area. Suddenly, the sky was quiet. Where moments before 8 enemy aircraft had controlled the airspace above the Coral Chain Islands, now there was only Sarah's lone F-35 circling the debris field that marked the sites of 7 aerial victories. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission from the USS Valiant. "Phoenix 1. This is Overwatch. We're showing multiple splash confirmations in your area. What's your status?" "Overwatch, Phoenix 1, Sarah replied, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline that was coursing through her system. "Mission complete. I count 7 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. 1 fled the area. No damage to friendly forces. Requesting permission to return to base. There was a long pause before the response came. Phoenix 1. Did you say 7 confirmed kills? Affirmative. Overwatch. 7 confirmed. 1 escaped. All enemy resistance in the patrol area has been eliminated. The radio silence that followed spoke volumes. Back on the carrier, the Air Operations Center was struggling to process what they had just heard. A single pilot had engaged 8 enemy aircraft and emerged victorious, achieving the kind of aerial victory that military historians would discuss for decades to come. But for Sarah, the engagement was already fading into memory as she focused on the flight back to the carrier. She had accomplished her mission. Gather intelligence on enemy capabilities and report back on their intentions. The fact that she had also eliminated the entire enemy force was simply a bonus. As she turned toward home, Sarah allowed herself a moment to reflect on what had just transpired. The enemy had made the same mistake that had cost countless military forces throughout history. They had underestimated their opponent based on appearance rather than capability. They had seen a single aircraft and assumed easy prey. They had failed to consider that the pilot might possess skills and determination far beyond their experience. Most critically, they had let their numerical advantage breed overconfidence, causing them to approach the engagement with less caution than the situation demanded. The surviving J-20 pilot was now racing back to his base, where he would have to explain to his commanders how 8 of their best aircraft had been destroyed by a single American pilot. That explanation would send shockwaves through their entire military structure, forcing them to completely reevaluate their assumptions about American fighter capabilities. More importantly, word of the engagement would spread throughout the region's military forces. The psychological impact of such a one-sided defeat would be enormous, affecting the confidence and decision-making of enemy pilots for months or even years to come. As the coastline of friendly territory appeared on the horizon, Sarah began her descent toward the USS Valiant. The carrier's flight deck was visible in the distance, with aircraft and personnel preparing for her return. She knew that questions would be waiting. Detailed debriefings, tactical analyses, and requests for her to explain how she had achieved the impossible. But those concerns were for later. For now, she was content to enjoy the peaceful flight home, the warm sun on her canopy, and the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Behind her, the empty sky above the Coral Chain Islands bore silent witness to one of the most remarkable aerial victories in military history. The woman they had dismissed as an easy target had just taught an entire enemy air force a lesson they would never forget. The USS Valiant's flight deck erupted in controlled chaos as Sarah's F-35 touched down with perfect precision. Aircraft handlers rushed to guide her toward the designated parking spot, while medical personnel stood by as a precautionary measure. Word of what had happened in the skies above the Coral Chain Islands had already reached the crew, and everyone wanted to see the pilot who had just achieved the impossible. Admiral James Harrison, commander of the carrier battle group, was waiting in the ready room when Sarah completed her post-flight inspection. At 55, Harrison had seen every kind of aerial engagement imaginable during his 30-year career, but he had never encountered anything like the report that had just crossed his desk. "Captain Chen," the admiral began as Sarah entered the room, still wearing her flight suit and carrying her helmet. "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened out there. And I want every detail." Sarah took a seat at the briefing table and began recounting the engagement, using the room's tactical display to show aircraft positions and movement patterns. As she spoke, more officers filtered into the room: intelligence specialists, tactical analysts, and senior pilots who had heard rumors of an unprecedented aerial victory. "After the first kill," Sarah explained, pointing to the display, "the enemy formation began to lose cohesion. They had trained for conventional engagements where numerical superiority would be decisive, but they weren't prepared for an opponent willing to fight at close range where their advantages were minimized." Commander Rick Bones Martinez, the ship's air wing commander, interrupted with a question that had been bothering him since the first reports came in. "Sarah, help me understand this. 8 aircraft, all flown by experienced pilots in capable machines, and you emerged without a scratch. What did you see in that engagement that they missed? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Sir, I think they made the fundamental error of fighting the engagement they expected, rather than the one that was actually happening. They assumed I would behave like a conventional pilot facing overwhelming odds, try to escape, call for backup, or at minimum, maintain standoff distance, and pick targets of opportunity. Instead, you charged straight into their formation, Admiral Harrison observed. Yes, sir. By closing to minimum range immediately, I eliminated their ability to use coordinated long-range tactics. Once they were forced into individual dogfights, their numerical advantage became much less significant. Intelligence Officer Commander Lisa Park had been taking detailed notes throughout the briefing. Captain Chen, the psychological impact of this engagement could be enormous. The enemy has never experienced anything like this level of tactical defeat. How do you think they'll respond? They'll have to completely re-evaluate their assumptions about our capabilities, Sarah replied. The surviving pilot will report back that a single American fighter destroyed 7 aircraft in 15 minutes. That kind of report will force their military leadership to question everything they think they know about air-to-air combat. What Sarah didn't know was that her assessment was already proving accurate. 300 miles to the northwest, the surviving J-20 pilot was indeed making his report to increasingly disbelieving superiors at the Shanwei Air Base. Major Chen Wei, the base commander, listened to the pilot's account with growing incredulity. Lieutenant, I want you to think very carefully about what you're telling me. You're claiming that one American pilot destroyed an entire formation of our best aircraft? The J-20 pilot, still shaking from his narrow escape, nodded emphatically. Sir, I watched it happen. The American didn't fight like anything we trained against. She was aggressive beyond anything in our doctrine. But she was also precise. Every attack was perfectly calculated. She? Major Chen Wei raised an eyebrow. You're certain the pilot was female? Yes, sir. I heard her voice on the radio during the final engagement. She was calm, professional, respectful even. The report made its way up the chain of command with unprecedented speed. By evening, it had reached the highest levels of the enemy military hierarchy, where it was met with a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. The implications were staggering. If American pilots possessed this level of capability, existing tactical doctrines would need complete revision. General Liu Zhao, commander of regional air operations, convened an emergency meeting of his senior staff. Gentlemen, we need to determine whether this engagement represents a new American capability or an exceptional individual. Either way, our response must be immediate and decisive. Sir, interrupted Colonel Wang, his chief intelligence officer. We've been monitoring American communications. The pilot's call sign is Phoenix 1. Our analysis suggests she's Captain Sarah Chen, commander of VFA 143, aboard the USS Valiant. General Liu studied the intelligence file that was quickly assembled. Sarah's record was impressive. Top of her class in flight training, multiple commendations for exceptional performance, and a reputation for innovative tactical thinking. But nothing in her background suggested the capability they had just witnessed. Have our pilots faced this individual before? The general asked. No, sir. This appears to be her first operational deployment to this region. But her training records indicate extensive preparation for exactly this type of engagement. The Americans appear to have been planning for high-intensity air-to-air combat for some time. The meeting continued for hours as the enemy leadership struggled to comprehend the tactical implications of the morning's events. Their entire regional air strategy had been based on the assumption of overwhelming American fighters through superior numbers and coordinated tactics. If those assumptions were wrong, they needed new strategies immediately. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Valiant, Sarah was discovering that her victory had created complications she hadn't anticipated. Admiral Harrison had received urgent communications from Fleet Headquarters, demanding detailed tactical analyses of the engagement. Military intelligence wanted to know if Sarah's success indicated broader changes in American fighter capabilities, or if it was the result of exceptional individual performance. Captain Chen, Admiral Harrison said during a private meeting in his quarters. "Washington wants to know if what you accomplished today is repeatable. Can we train other pilots to achieve similar results?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, the tactical innovations I used today aren't secret. Any skilled pilot could learn them with proper training. But the real key was understanding the enemy's mindset and exploiting their assumptions about how I would behave." Explain. "The enemy expected me to fight defensively because that's what their doctrine teaches about engaging superior numbers. By attacking aggressively instead, I forced them to react rather than execute their planned tactics. But that only works if the enemy doesn't know it's coming." Admiral Harrison nodded slowly. "So now that word is spreading about your tactics, future enemies will be better prepared?" "Exactly, sir. Today's success was partly due to surprise. Future engagements will be more challenging because our enemies will have adapted to this approach." The admiral leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. "Captain, I want you to work with our tactical development team to document everything you learned today. If we can understand why these tactics were so effective, maybe we can develop new approaches that will maintain our advantage." As news of the aerial victory spread throughout the fleet, Sarah found herself dealing with an unexpected consequence of her success: instant fame. Pilots from other squadrons sought her out for advice and tactical discussions. Junior officers requested transfers to her unit. Media reports, carefully censored for operational security, began referring to her as the Coral Chain Ace. But Sarah remained focused on the broader implications of the engagement. The enemy had revealed significant weaknesses in their tactical doctrine, but they were also demonstrating rapid adaptation. Intelligence reports indicated increased training activity at enemy air bases, with emphasis on countering aggressive single-fighter tactics. 3 days after the engagement, Sarah was conducting a training exercise with her squadron when her radar operator reported multiple contacts approaching from the northwest. The enemy was back, but this time they came in much larger numbers and with clearly different intentions. "Phoenix Leader, this is Overwatch," the radio crackled. "We count 16 contacts inbound, flying in multiple formations. Appears to be a coordinated strike package." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The enemy had learned from their previous defeat and was returning with overwhelming force. 16 aircraft represented twice the number she had faced before, and their formation discipline suggested they had developed new tactics specifically designed to counter her aggressive approach. "All Phoenix elements, this is Phoenix Leader," she transmitted to her squadron. "We have multiple bandits inbound. Execute Formation Delta and prepare for engagement." Her squadron consisted of 8 F-35 seconds, each flown by a pilot she had personally trained and mentored. They were among the best aviators in the Navy, but they had never faced the kind of odds that were approaching. 16 enemy aircraft against 8 friendly ones represented exactly the type of numerical disadvantage that conventional wisdom said should be avoided at all costs. But Sarah Chen had already proven that conventional wisdom had serious limitations. As the two formations closed toward an inevitable confrontation, Sarah made a decision that would either vindicate her tactical innovations or end in catastrophic defeat. Instead of waiting for the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement, she would once again take the initiative and force them to react to her actions. "Phoenix Flight, this is Phoenix Leader. We're going to hit them before they can coordinate their attack. Follow my lead and maintain aggressive posture throughout." 1. The enemy formation was approaching in what appeared to be a modified version of their previous tactics, designed to prevent a single aircraft from disrupting their coordination. But Sarah had anticipated this adaptation and had developed countermeasures during her post-engagement tactical analysis. What the enemy didn't know was that they were about to face not just Sarah's individual capabilities, but an entire squadron trained in her unconventional methods. The pilots of VFA 143 had spent the past 3 days learning to fight as a cohesive unit, while maintaining the individual initiative that had made Sarah's previous victory possible. The engagement was about to begin, and the outcome would determine whether Sarah's tactics represented a fundamental shift in air-to-air combat or a brilliant but unrepeatable individual achievement. The enemy had come seeking revenge for their previous humiliation, but they were about to discover that underestimating American fighter pilots was a mistake they couldn't afford to keep making. As the range closed to weapons engagement distance, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with the approach of combat. Her enemies had made the same error that had cost them so dearly 3 days earlier. They were fighting the engagement they wanted, rather than the one that was actually developing. The sky above the Coral Chain Islands was about to witness another chapter in what was rapidly becoming a legend that would reshape military aviation for years to come. The 16 enemy aircraft approaching from the northwest represented the largest air-to-air engagement in the region for over a decade. Intelligence reports indicated this was no routine patrol. It was a carefully planned operation designed specifically to counter the tactics that had proven so devastatingly effective 3 days earlier. Leading the enemy formation was Colonel Viktor Petrov, a Russian pilot with over 15 years of combat experience and a reputation as one of the most skilled aviators in the region. He had studied every available detail about the previous engagement and believed he had identified the weaknesses in Sarah's approach that could be exploited with proper preparation and overwhelming force. Dragon flight. This is Dragon Leader, Petrov transmitted to his formation. Remember, the American relies on aggressive tactics and close-range engagement. We maintain formation discipline and engage from maximum standoff distance. Do not allow her to close the range. What Colonel Petrov didn't understand was that he was preparing to fight the Sarah Chen of 3 days ago, not the evolved tactical thinker who had spent every moment since then developing new approaches based on lessons learned from the previous engagement. Sarah's squadron had been transformed during those 3 intensive training days. Each pilot had been taught not just to fly aggressively, but to think independently, while maintaining coordination with the larger formation. They had practiced engaging multiple targets simultaneously while providing mutual support, creating a tactical capability that no enemy had yet encountered. Phoenix flight. This is Phoenix Leader, Sarah transmitted as the range continued to close. Execute Hydra formation on my mark. Remember, we're not fighting 16 individual aircraft. We're fighting one large formation that can be disrupted if we target the right elements. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Viper Williams, Sarah's second-in-command, acknowledged the transmission while studying her tactical display. The enemy formation was indeed well organized, with clear command and control aircraft positioned to coordinate the engagement. But their tight formation also created opportunities for pilots trained in Sarah's unconventional methods. Phoenix Leader, Viper 2, Jessica transmitted. I count 4 command aircraft in the enemy formation. If we can eliminate their coordination capabilities, the remaining aircraft will be forced to fight individually. Confirmed. Viper 2. That's exactly what we're going to do. The engagement began at maximum missile range, with both formations launching long-range air-to-air missiles simultaneously. The sky filled with contrails as dozens of weapons tracked toward their targets, creating a deadly ballet of technology and tactics at 30,000 feet. Colonel Petrov's strategy appeared to be working perfectly. The American formation was forced to maneuver defensively, breaking their attack formation to avoid the incoming missiles. Several of Sarah's pilots were forced to expend countermeasures and abort their planned attacks to deal with the immediate threat to their own aircraft. But this was exactly what Sarah had anticipated. The enemy's opening gambit was tactically sound but predictable, and she had prepared her squadron for precisely this type of engagement. As her pilots maneuvered to avoid the incoming missiles, they were also positioning themselves for coordinated counterattacks that would exploit the enemy's overconfidence in their numerical advantage. All Phoenix elements, execute Phase 2 now, Sarah commanded. What happened next violated every principle of conventional air-to-air combat. Instead of maintaining defensive posture and trying to thin out the enemy formation with long-range engagements, the entire American squadron suddenly accelerated toward the enemy at maximum speed, closing the range to prevent the enemy from using their coordination advantage. Colonel Petrov watched in disbelief as 8 F-35 charged directly into his carefully organized formation. His first instinct was to order evasive maneuvers, but he quickly realized that would break up his own formation and eliminate the coordination advantage he had worked so hard to maintain. All units, hold formation. He transmitted urgently. Do not break formation. Maintain coordinated fire. All units. Maintain coordinated fire. But his pilots were already beginning to panic. The aggressive American approach was so far outside their training and experience that many were making individual decisions to evade rather than maintain formation discipline. The tight coordination that Colonel Petrov had counted on was beginning to fracture under the stress of an unexpected tactical approach. Sarah struck first, targeting the primary command aircraft with a precision that demonstrated why she had become legendary throughout the fleet. Her missile found its mark before the enemy pilot even realized he was under direct attack, eliminating the formation's primary coordination capability in a single devastating blow. Simultaneously, her wingmen were engaging the secondary command aircraft, using the chaos of the close-range engagement to prevent the enemy from establishing alternative coordination methods. Within 90 seconds of the initial contact, the enemy formation had lost 3 of its 4 command aircraft and was rapidly degenerating into individual dogfights. This was exactly the situation Sarah's squadron had trained for. While the enemy pilots struggled to adapt to fighting without centralized coordination, the American pilots seamlessly transitioned to independent operations while maintaining mutual support. Each Phoenix pilot was simultaneously engaging enemy aircraft while covering their wingmen, creating overlapping fields of fire that made it nearly impossible for the enemy to achieve clear tactical advantages. Lieutenant Tom Hawk Rodriguez, flying Phoenix 3, found himself engaged with 2 enemy Su-35 seconds that had attempted to isolate him from the main formation. Instead of calling for assistance, Hawk used tactics he had learned directly from Sarah to turn the engagement in his favor. "Phoenix 3 engaging 2 bandits," he transmitted calmly. No assistance required. Hawk's confidence was justified. Using electronic warfare techniques and aggressive maneuvering, he managed to position both enemy aircraft where they interfered with each other's targeting solutions. When he finally achieved firing position, both enemy pilots were so focused on trying to get a clear shot that they failed to notice their own vulnerability. 2 more enemy aircraft fell to the ocean below, adding to what was rapidly becoming another overwhelming American victory. Colonel Petrov, flying one of the few remaining command aircraft, was struggling to comprehend how his carefully planned engagement was falling apart so completely. He had brought twice as many aircraft as the Americans had faced in their previous engagement, flown by experienced pilots using updated tactics designed specifically to counter aggressive close-range fighting. Yet somehow, the Americans were systematically destroying his formation with the same devastating effectiveness they had demonstrated before. "All remaining units, this is Dragon Leader," he transmitted desperately. "Break formation and engage individually. Repeat. Break formation and engage at will." It was exactly the wrong order at the wrong time. Sarah had been waiting for the enemy commander to abandon formation discipline, and she immediately capitalized on his mistake. "Phoenix flight, enemy formation is breaking up," she transmitted to her squadron. "Execute individual engagements. Remember your training and watch each other's backs." The engagement now fragmented into multiple individual dogfights scattered across 50 square miles of sky. This should have favored the enemy, who still maintained a numerical advantage of nearly 2-1. But Sarah's pilots had been trained to excel in exactly this type of chaotic environment, while their enemies were struggling to adapt to fighting without the formation discipline they had relied upon throughout their careers. Commander Williams found herself facing 3 enemy aircraft simultaneously, a situation that should have been hopeless for a single pilot. But she had learned from Sarah that apparent disadvantages could be turned into advantages with proper positioning and timing. Instead of trying to evade all 3 opponents, Williams deliberately positioned herself where all 3 would converge on the same attack vector. At the critical moment, she executed a maneuver that caused 2 of the enemy aircraft to interfere with each other's attack, while leaving the 3rd exposed to her counterattack. The result was spectacular. Williams' missile destroyed 1 enemy aircraft outright, while the collision avoidance maneuvers of the other 2 left them vulnerable to follow-up attacks from other Phoenix pilots who had been monitoring the engagement. 3 more enemy aircraft were eliminated in the span of 30 seconds, reducing the enemy force from 16 aircraft to fewer than 8. While the American squadron remained largely intact, Colonel Petrov realized that his mission had become impossible. His formation had been shattered, his pilots were demoralized, and the Americans continued to demonstrate tactical capabilities that his training had not prepared him to counter. Continuing the engagement would only result in the complete destruction of his remaining aircraft. "All Dragon units, this is Dragon Leader," he transmitted with obvious reluctance. "Disengage immediately. Repeat. All units disengage and return to base." But Sarah wasn't finished. The enemy had come seeking revenge for their previous defeat, and she intended to ensure they understood the futility of challenging American air superiority in the region. "Phoenix Flight, enemy is attempting to disengage," she transmitted. "Pursue and destroy. Show them that running won't save them." The final phase of the engagement became a long-range pursuit as the surviving enemy aircraft attempted to reach the safety of their own territorial waters. But Sarah's F-35s had superior speed and range, allowing them to maintain contact and continue attacking even as the enemy fled toward their bases. One by one, the retreating aircraft were caught and destroyed. The pilots of VFA 143 demonstrated the same precision and professionalism that had made their commander famous, ensuring that each engagement was clean and decisive. There was no unnecessary cruelty or excessive force, just the methodical elimination of a threat that had chosen to challenge American air superiority. When the engagement finally ended, only 3 enemy aircraft remained airborne, and they were rapidly approaching their own territorial boundaries, where American pilots were not authorized to pursue. Colonel Petrov was among the survivors, but his formation of 16 aircraft had been reduced to 3 in less than 20 minutes of combat. "Phoenix Leader, this is Overwatch." The radio crackled as Sarah's squadron began forming up for the return flight to the carrier. "We show multiple splash confirmations in your area. Request status report." "Overwatch, Phoenix Leader," Sarah replied, her voice betraying none of the intense satisfaction she felt at her squadron's performance. 13 enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed. 3 escaped toward hostile territory. All Phoenix aircraft operational and returning to base. The silence that followed was even longer than after her previous engagement. In the carrier's Combat Information Center, Admiral Harrison was staring at displays that showed the impossible had happened again. A single American squadron had engaged a force twice their size and achieved another overwhelming victory, losing no aircraft of their own while destroying over 80% of the enemy force. But this time, it wasn't just Sarah Chen who had achieved the impossible. Her entire squadron had demonstrated that her tactical innovations could be taught and replicated, transforming VFA 143 into perhaps the most lethal air-to-air unit in military history. As the Phoenix Squadron began their flight back to the USS Valiant, none of them yet understood the full implications of what they had just accomplished. They had proven that American fighter tactics had evolved beyond anything their enemies could counter, establishing air superiority so complete that future challenges would require entirely different approaches. The legend of the Phoenix Squadron was spreading even faster than Sarah's individual reputation. Within hours, intelligence reports of the engagement would reach the highest levels of enemy military commands throughout the region, forcing fundamental re-evaluations of tactical doctrine and strategic planning. But for the pilots of VFA 143, the engagement was already fading into memory as they focused on the routine procedures of returning to base. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, just as their commander had taught them they could. The impossible had become routine, and the exceptional had become expected. The enemies who had dismissed Sarah Chen as an easy target were learning that they had fundamentally misunderstood not just her individual capabilities, but the entire evolution of American fighter aviation. The woman they had tried to ambush had become the teacher of a new generation of pilots who would dominate the skies for decades to come. 6 months after the devastating defeat over the Coral Chain Islands, the regional balance of power had shifted dramatically. Enemy air forces throughout the Pacific had been forced to completely restructure their tactics, training programs, and operational doctrines in response to the new reality of American air superiority, demonstrated by Sarah Chen and her Phoenix Squadron. The impact extended far beyond tactical considerations. Intelligence reports indicated that several potential adversaries had postponed planned military operations indefinitely, unwilling to risk their air assets against opponents who had proven capable of achieving impossible victory ratios. The psychological effect of Sarah's victories was reshaping strategic calculations throughout the region. Sarah stood in the Pentagon briefing room, facing an audience of senior military leaders, defense analysts, and international observers who had come to understand how a single pilot's innovations had changed the nature of modern air warfare. Her promotion to full colonel had been accelerated by 6 months, and she now served as the Navy's primary tactical development officer for air-to-air combat. The key insight, Sarah explained to the assembled officials, was recognizing that numerical superiority only matters if you allow the enemy to use it effectively. By forcing close-range engagements and disrupting formation coordination, we eliminated the advantages that large formations traditionally provide. Admiral Rebecca Morrison, the Chief of Naval Operations, nodded thoughtfully. Colonel Chen, what we're really discussing here is a fundamental shift in how we approach air combat. Your tactics have proven so effective that our potential adversaries are struggling to develop counters. How sustainable is this advantage? Sarah considered the question carefully. Over the past months, she had worked with the military's finest tactical minds to analyze and refine the approaches that had proven so devastatingly effective. The results had been incorporated into training programs throughout the fleet, creating a new generation of pilots capable of achieving similar results. Ma'am, the specific tactics I used initially will become less effective as enemies adapt, but the underlying principles, aggressive initiative, formation disruption, and exploiting enemy assumptions, those remain valid regardless of how our opponents modify their approaches. Dr. James Patterson, the Pentagon's chief strategic analyst, interjected with a question that had been concerning defense planners for weeks. Colonel, we've seen reports that several nations are developing automated defense systems specifically designed to counter single-pilot tactical innovations. How do you assess the threat from AI-controlled fighter aircraft? Sarah's expression grew serious. This was indeed the next challenge facing American air superiority, and one she had been studying intensively. Enemy military leaders, frustrated by their inability to develop human pilots capable of matching American performance, were investing heavily in automated systems that could theoretically eliminate the human factors that had made her victories possible. Dr. Patterson, automated systems present both opportunities and challenges. They can potentially eliminate the panic and formation breakdown that I exploited in human opponents, but they also have predictable response patterns that can be studied and countered. The real question is whether we can maintain our tactical innovation advantage faster than they can develop automated responses. General Michael Stevens, the Air Force Chief of Staff, leaned forward with obvious interest. Colonel Chen, your techniques have been adapted throughout our fighter community, but we're also seeing evolutionary pressure from our enemies. What's your assessment of the next phase in this tactical development? Sir, I believe we're entering a period where individual pilot excellence will become even more critical. As our enemies develop more sophisticated responses to current tactics, our pilots will need to improvise and adapt in real time. The automation approach our adversaries are pursuing actually creates vulnerability. Automated systems can't innovate during combat the way human pilots can. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering everything from training methodologies to strategic implications of the changing tactical environment. What emerged was a clear picture of American air forces that had gained a significant but temporary advantage, one that would need constant innovation to maintain. 3 weeks later, that innovation was tested in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Sarah found herself leading a joint strike mission deep into contested territory, where intelligence indicated the enemy was preparing to test their new automated defense systems against American aircraft. The mission parameters were complex. Eliminate a heavily defended command center while avoiding civilian casualties, and gathering intelligence on enemy automation capabilities. Sarah's force consisted of 12 F-35 seconds from multiple squadrons, all flown by pilots, trained in her tactical methods but facing their most difficult challenge yet. Phoenix leader, this is Overwatch, the radio crackled as they approached the target area. Be advised, we're detecting unusual radar signatures in the target zone. Appears to be something we haven't seen before. Sarah's tactical display confirmed what the warning had indicated. The enemy had deployed a new type of air defense system that exhibited none of the characteristics of traditional fighter aircraft. The radar signatures were smaller, faster, and moved in perfect coordination that no human pilot could maintain. All units, "This is Phoenix Leader," Sarah transmitted. "We're facing automated opponents. Remember your training, but be prepared to improvise. These systems won't react the way human pilots do." The first contact came without warning. 6 automated aircraft emerged from cloud cover, moving in perfect formation at speeds that would have been impossible for human pilots to sustain. Their attack approach was flawless from a technical standpoint. Optimal angles, perfect timing, coordinated to eliminate any possibility of evasion or counterattack. It was also completely predictable. Sarah had spent weeks studying the theory behind automated fighter systems, and she recognized the attack pattern immediately. The enemy aircraft were executing a textbook coordinated strike, optimized by computer calculations to achieve maximum effectiveness against conventional opponents. But Sarah Chen had never been a conventional opponent. "Phoenix Flight, execute Chaos Protocol immediately," she commanded. "Make yourselves unpredictable." Chaos Protocol was Sarah's newest tactical innovation, developed specifically to counter automated systems. Instead of following coordinated flight patterns that computers could analyze and predict, her pilots began flying in deliberately random patterns that appeared chaotic, but were actually carefully designed to prevent automated targeting systems from achieving stable firing solutions. The effect on the enemy automated systems was immediate and devastating. Their perfect coordination became a liability as they struggled to adapt to targets that defied prediction. Computer algorithms that had been optimized for engaging rational human opponents found themselves facing behavior that seemed completely irrational, but was actually precisely calculated to exploit their programming limitations. Sarah's first kill was achieved not through superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but through something no computer could replicate: creative tactical thinking applied in real time to a completely novel situation. Her missile struck an automated fighter that had been programmed to evade conventional attacks but had no response protocols for the unconventional approach she employed. The engagement that followed demonstrated the fundamental limitation of automated warfare systems. While they could execute programmed responses with perfect precision, they lacked the creative adaptation that human pilots brought to complex tactical situations. Each automated aircraft fought brilliantly according to its programming, but none could adjust to tactics they had not been specifically designed to counter. Sarah's pilots systematically destroyed the automated formation, using approaches that no computer had been programmed to anticipate. The victory was decisive, but it also revealed something troubling about the future of air warfare. The enemy had clearly invested enormous resources in developing these automated systems, and while this first generation had proven vulnerable to innovative tactics, future versions would undoubtedly be more sophisticated. "Phoenix Leader, this is Overwatch," came the transmission as the engagement concluded. "Outstanding work out there. Intelligence wants a full debrief on those automated systems as soon as you return." But Sarah was already thinking beyond the immediate victory. The enemy's automated fighters had demonstrated capabilities that human pilots simply couldn't match in terms of raw performance. Their coordination had been perfect, their reaction times superhuman, and their technical execution flawless. Only their lack of creative adaptation had made them vulnerable. Future versions would likely address those weaknesses, creating a new type of opponent that combined computer precision with more sophisticated tactical programming. The implications for air warfare were staggering. Battles fought between human pilots and thinking machines, where victory would depend on creativity, innovation, and the uniquely human ability to find solutions to seemingly impossible problems. As the strike force began its return journey, Sarah found herself considering the broader implications of what they had just experienced. The era of human versus human air combat was ending, replaced by something more complex and potentially more dangerous. The skills that had made her legendary, tactical innovation, aggressive initiative, and the ability to exploit enemy assumptions, would become even more critical in this new environment. 6 months earlier, enemy commanders had dismissed her as an easy target based on numerical disadvantage and conventional wisdom. Today, those same military leaders were scrambling to develop automated systems capable of countering human tactical innovation. The transformation was complete. Sarah Chen had evolved from underestimated opponent to the standard against which all future air combat capabilities would be measured. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that human creativity and adaptability remained the decisive factors in aerial combat. Regardless of technological advancement, the enemies who had tried to eliminate the human element from warfare were discovering that innovation, courage, and tactical brilliance could not be automated or programmed away. The legend that had begun over the Coral Chain Islands was entering its next chapter, and Sarah Chen was ready to meet whatever challenges the future might bring. She had transformed air warfare once through tactical innovation and aggressive leadership. Now she would lead the development of new approaches designed to maintain human superiority in an age of thinking machines and automated warfare. The woman they had called an easy target had become the architect of American air superiority for the next generation. And she was just getting started.